And next up, we're going to go to Steve. Pronouns are he, him. He's from Nebraska. Says that God's artificially generated information signal embedded in our genetic code. So it sounds like you want to talk about DNA as a code. Is that correct, Steve?
Well, yeah. Hi, Dr. Ben and Jamie. Yeah, so I was calling to discuss my belief in the supreme Elohim, whom I consider life's creator, whose artificially generated information signals embedded in our genetic code that conveys the message of an Egyptian's triangles equation as a result of factoring out 37.
Steve, stop. Hold on.
I have had this conversation with you before. I was dressed as a shark. Are you going to point to a particular study, a scientific study that you found in a journal?
Yeah, I believe we have discussed this. I think it's episode of Truth Water Halloween.
I don't know if I have though. I want to hear what's the specific claim.
Okay, so the message of an Egyptian triangles equation as a result of factoring out 37 from the atomic masses of the structural components belonging to the bioamino acids, which can be sufficiently defined by their codons first and second base nucleotides. This message appears. So there's this message conveyed in genetic code that results in an Egyptian triangle and the number 37.
So so I have some questions. How is this message conveyed? How did this message get interpreted? What are the things, like you said, it's coming from codons. What specific information are you getting from the codons to then translate to whatever this message is?
Okay, so in the genetic, if you take the structural components belonging to bioamino acids, those which can be sufficiently defined by their codons first and second.
Okay, no, but stop repeating the script. My question is, so how are you getting the message? So clearly you're getting letters from the codons. Which naming system are you using for the codons? Are you using the single letter abbreviation? Are you using the 3-letter abbreviation? Are you going off of the specific nucleotides in the amino acid structure? How are you getting these letters?
Okay, so nucleotides are the building blocks of DNA, right?
I'm aware. Thank you. I'm asking you where, it sounds like, Steve, that you're repeating a script that you thought sounded very sciencey and that sounded like what you wanted it to say. I've studied the science. I know a lot about how DNA works. I'm just asking you to clarify on a smaller level. Because if you understand this, you should be able to break it down into its components, right? You should be able to tell me how you got this message. Where does this message come from?
It comes from the genetic code, the atomic.
Okay, where in the genetic code?
Okay, the structural components.
Which structural components? Which structural components give us the message?
Okay, the blockchain and the side chain and the total.
Okay, what are the components of these the blockchain, the side chain? What is there? Are they Lego? Are they nucleotides? Are they helium atoms? What are we talking about here?
No, these are the structural components. I believe that I
get that you're saying that it's a structural component. I'm asking if you know what the structural components are. What makes up DNA?
Okay. DNA is, as I understand, is made up of nucleotides. And as I understand, it's comprised of nitrogenous bases. And these bases are the letters of the genetic code. For example, A for, I think, adenine, C for cytosine.
So you understand, though, that so we have the nitrogenous base and we have the carbohydrate backbone, right? And that forms the helix through hydrogen bonding. But here's the thing. When we assigned the names to the nucleotides, that's just our own language adding a name to thing. I could assign the name of spam to a nucleotide. I could have spam, I could have sardine, I could have Like I could assign those names and it would still, the component would still be the same thing. It would still have the same function, right? But I would just call it something different. So like the name for adenine, guanine, cytosine, like all those things, those are just names. And the letters we assign to it, like the code, if you will, that it spells out like A, T, C, G, all those in the line, those are arbitrary letters that we assign to them.
I understand. Right. Yeah, I understand.
So I'm confused about how we get this very planned out message with something that, like, literally the name of the thing doesn't matter.
Exactly. No, what matters is the atomic masses of the structural components of the amino acids.
So now you're telling me now we're kind of getting somewhere. So we're defining the message is written out based on the atomic masses of the components. So we have the atomic mass. What do we do with that information now?
Okay, so when you factor out these atomic masses, like you take all the amino acids.
What do you mean factor out? What are we doing, an equation with it? Is there a specific formula? How did you derive this formula?
Right. Well, when you factor out 37 from the total atomic masses of
what do you mean? What do you mean by factor out? Are you dividing it? Are you multiplying it? Are you finding the derivative of it? Are you doing an integral equation? What is the math that you're doing with the 37 from the atomic mass?
You divide 37 from the cumulative atomic masses of amino acid plot chain, and then you take
hold on. The atomic masses of. So I'm guessing, did the person who did this, did they take all of like the amino acids and do the math, calculating out the atomic masses of the entire amino acid, and then figuring that out for every amino acid in DNA? Is that what they did?
They did those amino acids that are sufficiently defined by their codons first and second base nucleotides.
Okay, so how did they determine that so you got that? Again, I'm asking, did they, so you're talking about the atomic masses like in total of those two codons. Is that what I'm getting? Of those amino acids?
You're talking the atomic masses of the amino acids.
Right. So they would have had to take because the atomic mass is for an element, right? So you have the atom on the periodic table, you have that, and you add those atomic masses together. Are they going from the average atomic mass? Because if we're talking the periodic table, we're talking of the most predominant isotope. So are we factoring in the other isotopes, or how are we getting this specific number for the atomic mass of the amino acid?
Well, I believe they're taking the most common universal isotope atomic masses.
Okay.
I believe.
So we're taking that, and so what we're going to have to do to get that right is if we have, because amino acids are made up of a lot of different types of atoms, right? Because we got nitrogen, we've got carbon, because they're organic compounds. Yeah. So so we're adding up all of the atoms, and their atomic masses for the elements in these amino acids, and then dividing it by 37. And then that's how we get the part of the message.
Yeah, I think basically if you take the structural components of the sum of these the atomic masses of these amino acids, you divide that, like you take the side chain of these amino acids you add up the atomic masses of these amino acids structural components. Like they have a block core, they have a core component, a side chain component.
Yeah, I get that. So I'm working on doing the math here to see if we can demonstrate this. So do you have So now that I know how do we get the message, what is the message that it gives supposedly? And I guess like here's my next question though. Okay, so we have these amino acids. We have like, let's say we did the math and we took 37 divided from like this number that we will have calculated. Whose DNA are we taking this from? Like whose DNA is telling this message?
It's a universal genetic code. So it's everybody's DNA.
Everybody has the same genetic code.
Everybody pretty much has the same.
Do you believe that?
Do
you believe that, Steve?
Genetic code for humans. The same genetic coding works for humans.
No. We have the same genes for the most part. We have the same chromosomes for the most part. There's of course some variation there, but like that, the whole thing about having alleles is that you have genes that have differences in them. We have differences in the genes that make us individuals, right? Because the DNA encodes for proteins, which have to fit into receptors to do what they do. The things that made Jamie are things that I don't have in the same way.
Take it from someone who has a genetic mutation based syndrome and only a partial case of it for that. My DNA ain't like most people's DNA. It's kind of fucked up.
I'm not saying DNA. Hold on. I'm saying the genetic code, that the coding, the genetic code, that's different than the DNA.
So it sounds like you don't understand what you're talking about, Steve, because the genetic code, you have the DNA that you copy from, you have a complementary strand, of course, and then you make the RNA. So the RNA is what ends up coding for proteins, but the genetic, I'm not sure why you're making a distinction for DNA and genetic code. What part of the process does genetic code refer to? Because that's not a term used in science for anything other than like the recipe, essentially. Like the genetic code is the starting DNA that you're using to like either copy itself or to make RNA.
Okay, let me try and give an example. I think I might know where Steve's coming from, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Steve. So we might say that the code for the game Minecraft is this hundreds and hundreds of lines of code, but it's coded in Java. That's the programming language. Are you talking about the programming language of DNA?
Programming language, but yes, the programming language. Thank you.
And so that's the analogy.
But
go for it, Ben.
Yeah, so I would disagree that that's something that you can really use, because we dumb it down. We dumb it down to say that DNA is a genetic code or whatever, but it doesn't work. It doesn't actually work like that, right? It's not something that you just copy and you get a product that does the same thing every time. Like it is a pretty messy process of like producing proteins, and then those proteins bind with receptors, or those proteins become enzymes and they have an active site and bind with something else to like catalyze a reaction. So it's not like where a code has it has a set of if this, then this. That's not what DNA does. And that's not what biology does. What proteins do, like literally if they're in proximity and they have the right conditions to, link up with each other and do what they're going to do, that's not the same thing as having like the specific set of instructions that it's following. And a lot of what DNA, kind of encodes for are proteins that just, they fit together because they're the right size and they're in the right place at the right time. So I don't think that saying that there's a language involved is really helping the understanding of this concept. So that's where I'm confused, because you're saying things in a colloquial way that, and I can't speak, in a way that just is so inaccurate for what is really happening that I'm confused. So I'm confused about how we're getting a message. And that's why I'm asking you a lot of these kind of nitty-gritty questions, because I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the DNA transcription and translation process leads to and what we get from this. So, like, do you have any clarification on like where this language comes from and like how we get the message for it?
Yeah, there's a paper titled Wow Signal of the Terrestrial Code. And you can, it's detailed in how you can read up on that. It was published in a paper, I think, back in 2014.
Can you repeat the name of this?
Yeah, Wow Signal of the Terrestrial Genetic Code, authored by, I think Vladimir Sherbak is one of the authors, and the other, I think, is Maxim Makakov. And what they did is they took the amino acids, those which are sufficiently defined by the composition of their codons first and second base nucleotides. So this class of amino acids, they took those, and what they did was they took the structural components, they added up the atomic masses of all these amino acids, side chains, and then their main core atomic masses, and then their total, the sum of the core structure and then the side chain total. And then they factored out 37, and they came up with, so if you
okay, well, stop there for a second, Steve. Just to give a bit of armchair quarterbacking from our wonderful Miranda Redensberger, why 37?
Okay, so if you take the nucleon sum, or the atomic masses of these amino acid side chain, you add them up, it's 333. That equals 37 times 3 squared. And then if you take the sum of these, the core structured atomic masses, it equals 592, which is 37 times 4 squared. And then you take the sum of their total atomic masses. That's 925, which is 37 times 5 squared.
So I'm confused, Steve, though, but why are they doing this math? Like, how did this derivation come about? Like, so if we're using math, like in physics or chemistry, for example, if we're trying to model the universe, there's a specific reason for why the numbers we're picking are the numbers we're picking. Like, what it sounds to me like is they picked numbers that were convenient enough to get the result that they wanted.
And I'm certain that if the atomic masses added up and whatever were different, then and you factor them out the same way, you'd get a different number. It might be like 42 or 78 or whatever, and the math would still work. Like, it just does feel, it has the stench of fitting the facts and fit the narrative rather than the other way around. Like, they want to find something, and by God, they'll break the math over their knee to make it happen.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like they manipulated the numbers to work in favor for the message they wanted to communicate.
I don't think they manipulated anything. I think they just worked out.
Yeah, that's what, when we say manipulate the numbers, that's a term just used in math to say you did logic, you solved through mathematical processes to get to your result. So that's what I mean by manipulated. I don't mean that they like necessarily falsified any of the math, but I do think that they maybe, it's unclear what the goal of this derivation was. It's unclear exactly why they did what they did. Does that make sense?
Well, I think they were just looking for any message for an intelligent.
And that's the problem. If they were looking for a message, you're going to try and find it.
That would have been their. Yeah, so they found the message.
No, they were looking for a message, and then they found it.
Right.
No serious scientist would go looking for a message. They might find evidence that a message may occur and then try and disprove that it is one. Like, that's the method. You don't fit the facts to your narrative. You do your absolute utmost to disprove what you apparently have found. Only under the robustness of falsifiability does something become scientifically robust. So again, this is the exact same conversation we had in Halloween last year, and Ben did a fantastic job of trying to eke out the actual nitty gritty of it. It's still completely unconvincing to me, Chief. Sorry.
Okay.
Any more thoughts, Ben?
No, I mean, I guess we took a lot of time getting to the message. What was the message that was said?
The message what conveyed was the equation for an Egyptian triangle, which is 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared, and then the number 37. So therefore God, right? If there's an Egyptian triangle, message of an Egyptian triangle, 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. If that message is in our genetic code, God had to put it there, right?
No. Again, it sounds like you're looking for, like, if the number was a different number, would you still think the same way? Would you still think that God put it there? Or is there significance to that specific number?
There is, because in the Bible's first verse, if you take the Hebrew gematria value of in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and you add that up, that's equal to 2,701, which can only be factored out by 37 and its near number of 37. Therefore, this God.
Yeah, so again, you have this kind of shorter equation, right, that seems to have more significance because it relates to specific things in numerology in the Bible. But there's kind of a weird disconnect, though, between this and then what you're saying before. It seems like the kind of the math, like there's a lot of math steps we had to do, right, in order to get to that, all that stuff being in our DNA, right? How many things do we have to break down to even kind of get an idea of where the math was going? Like, and you could take a similar step with, if I said that I have a certain amount of like beer cans in my fridge and I multiply that number of beer cans like by the number of weeks that I've been alive divided by, what other number, I could find significance in any number at all and just kind of throw that into the equation as well in a way that makes the number come out the way that I want it to.
Okay, but this particular number comes up in other patterns found in DNA.
So what were the other patterns in DNA, and were they found in the same way? Is the equation they took for the first message that you brought up, does that equation translate to, like, is that useful in other things as well, or is it a totally separate equation for these other messages?
Okay, I believe, and I wish I could recall the other ways they could find this number and other but there are mathematical patterns in our DNA.
Right, but just because that there's mathematical patterns to the amount of beers in my fridge, but that doesn't mean that it's that significant. Why I'm asking this particular question is that, like, if I do math related to, let's take physiology, for example. If I do math related to cardiac output and heart rate, like, we can use these numbers to model reality. And so these numbers matter because I can tell somebody if they have heart failure or not based on those numbers. But what I can also do, I can take that equation and use that to get other numbers that will also translate back into the same equation. Like a good model, it's not just throwing numbers together and then seeing what sticks. like these actually transfer to other concepts that are related. So I can take pulmonary equations that rely on cardiac output and use very similar equations together. I can substitute X for this equation for lung volume. I can do those things, and they will give the same answer because the equations model the same reality.
And
I don't know if you can do that with what you're doing here with numbers in the DNA, because so much of that is relying on an arbitrary naming system, like assigned to these, and then, you know, translating that over to math. Like, I think just saying that we have math is not good enough to say that the math means anything.
Mm. And
I think that there's this assumption that you do the math and therefore it's logical, but that isn't the case. I don't know if you remember being back in like a geometry classroom or a calculus classroom where you have to prove your math. I remember being so frustrated with those classes. Like, why do I have to prove an equation that we already know like works? And that's the whole point, is to learn how to prove that your math works. And like, that's what I had to do in physics as well. If you're going to derive your own equation, you have to show how you got to that equation and that your equation is accurate to model the world around you. Can they do that with these equations for the DNA? Do these equations accurately model other parts of reality, or is this just isolated to this scenario?
Well, as far as I know, this is just for them to as a criteria to find the information signals in the genetic code.
And Steve,
I don't know that would have any other practical purposes.
Steve, I can just as easily draw connections that sound significant. Did you know that the human body operates at a temperature of 37 degrees Celsius? It's the same number. It's completely fucking arbitrary. Like, I'm sorry. This is, it's white noise at this point in my brain. I'm seeing post hoc rationalization after post hoc rationalization after post hoc rationalization, and I can't see any significance in it, man.
Atomic masses aren't arbitrary. They're factual. They're not just.
Well, no, but in that equation, you had to make so many clarifications for which numbers counted, because atomic masses, as we were talking, are like usually reported for the most commonly available isotope. So that number could change. Like if I decided that we're actually going to use like carbon-14 instead of carbon-12, then like that would give me a different number, right? So you can take objective data and do nonsense with it, and that's what this sounds like. But just because you used an objective number does not mean that your conclusion from that objective number is influential for anything.
You can't use carbon-14; it's unstable. It's radioactive. You have to use to get this to work. You have to use the stable.
Okay, so it has to be stable. This leaves so many more questions, and it's like then you get into are you using ionized forms of compounds, or are you just using their like elemental forms? Are you like, what are the rest of the parameters for these? Like, I'm just confused about like how many variables we have to work with, and like you're not clearly defining these out until like I ask you about them, and then when I ask you about them, it's still not super clear. So it's just very hard to do anything with this information. But kind of a more important question, now that we've I think we've gotten to the end of this piece, but how do, like, let's say that this was true. Let's say that, okay, we have this math that is like able to be repeated and get the same number of 37. How do we get to God from that?
Well, if the signal is composed of arithmetical and ideographical patterns, whose arithmetical units are represented by the amino acid nucleons, whereas codon bases serve as graphical entities, that equals God. If this,
No, okay, so now we're getting to an argument of this thing exists, therefore God. Like,
exactly.
but I don't have much to convince me that this whole number situation wasn't a coincidence. Like, do you believe that things can happen coincidentally and still seem meaningful?
If you saw an artistic pattern carved in a trunk of a tree that was an Egyptian triangle, right angle triangle.
If I saw if I saw something carved into a tree, I would probably have a couple thoughts. I could think, hey, some other person was here and carved this into a tree. It might have meaning, it might not. Or another thought is, hey, this is maybe a natural phenomenon that like maybe an animal did this, or maybe some weather pattern did this. And hey, that's kind of a cool coincidence. But I don't have any other reason to believe that it has supernatural significance.
Yeah. That'd be like,
so like how did you determine that it's that significant?
We can look at the geometric perfection of a snowflake and go, oh, that's cool. That's natural. We can look at the Giant's Causeway and understand that it's natural, although it's geometric and cool and a pattern. It looks like someone carved steps out of rock. Like, yeah, how do we know that it's God-based, not natural-based?
Well, like I said, if you walked through a forest and you saw a Egyptian triangle.
The watchmaker argument. Okay,
what is the big deal about this Egyptian triangle?
That would be because.
What is the big deal with the Egyptian triangle?
It's a 90 degree. It has a 90-degree right angle, and it has side ratios of 3, 4, and 5.
So we're getting back to the whole significance is the number.
That's not a natural pattern. That's not a pattern that is conveyed.
How do you know that?
Make that pattern.
How do you know that?
Never been found outside of being artificially generated, because that.
How do you know that?
In those dimensions. Well, I know as far as what we know here. I mean, I can't know everywhere in the universe, but at least in this part of our universe, this only occurs by an artificially generated force. This particular pattern of this particular dimensions.
Do you think that because you haven't experienced something, or that you haven't seen an example, do you think that automatically makes something not natural?
Well, if I saw the number 37 carved on a trunk of a tree in the forest, I would know somebody put that there. You guys might not, but I figured that out.
Okay, well,
you guys wouldn't.
Do you think that it's possible that it was not a human that did that? Like maybe it was, like I said, a weather pattern, an animal, something else. Are there other possibilities for what may have caused that if you saw it?
What other possibility could there be? Who else would tinker with genetic code? Who invented it?
And that's where we have to just ask the question. And it sounds like instead of asking the question, your thought is to just assign an answer to it. Is it possible that there's an answer that you don't know?
I think there's no other explanation. Mine's the best explanation.
So you are so confident in yourself that you've ruled out every other possibility. How did you rule out every other possibility?
Best explanation. It's the only explanation that makes sense to me.
Steve, you sound incredibly confident in yourself for someone that knows so little about how DNA works. But it just, like, even in areas that I have a lot of education in, I know that I am frequently wrong. I know that there's a lot that I don't know. And it just amazes me that somebody could think that their answer was the only possibility. Like, because even people with like so much more experience and knowledge than me, like top experts in any field, are going to say that there are pieces of knowledge that they don't know. There's a lot that you don't know that you don't know. And to say so confidently that there's only one possibility, like, don't you think that's a bit arrogant to say?
I think it's the only, I mean, the best explanation. If I accept that until a better one comes along, if a better explanation comes along, I will reevaluate my belief system.
So you're gonna hold on to something instead of like you're gonna just latch onto something instead of really allowing for the possibility that you don't know what you don't know. You know, you could just say that you don't know.
Along, I will change my beliefs.
Okay.
And yeah, I feel like there's not much more to go with that. If you're that confident, but
I'm going to go ahead and do a bit of research after the show and see if there are any naturally occurring right angle pyramids, because I know that there's cubic minerals. There's plenty of right angles in nature, but I think that it'd have to be a specific dimension.
And they have to have side lengths of 3, 4, and 5. It has to be that too. It has to be an Egyptian triangle. Doesn't happen in nature.
Okay. And if I was able to find even one example of a naturally occurring Egyptian pyramid triangle, would you change your mind?
I would. I'm open-minded as anybody.
Okay. Well, we'll see.
I base my beliefs on the evidence.
okay.
At least he's open-minded enough to give us falsifiability criteria.
Well, I'll do some homework. I will read this study because I'm kind of curious. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your day, Steve.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for taking my call, guys. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Take care.
Okay.
All right.
I honestly can't say anything other than that I have not been so confused, befuddled, and disappointed and frustrated since the end of the second Matrix movie. Systemic anomaly.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been that confused about math before. And I used to not be very good at math, but I mean, it's a thing. I know that like math is not taught very well a lot of the time. And because I think people focus on memorizing formulas instead of learning how to solve a problem. And I know Scott Dickey does a really good job talking about the importance of math and this whole topic, since it's what he teaches. It's his whole livelihood is teaching math. So, but like it is using your brain to solve a problem and to map the world around you in a way that is repeatable and can you can demonstrate its accuracy. But that being said, a lot of people have this kind of view of math that it is purely objective and that anything that is done with math is going to be correct and you can't disprove it because I did the math. Like, well, no, you can do whatever bullshit with math. Like it's just like anything else. But definitely with that kind of situation, it sounds on its face like there's data there. It sounds like there's scientific inquiry there. But you look under the surface and you start to break that down into its components. Like, okay, you're saying that it's related to this genetic code, but what do you mean by that? What is this code you're referring to? What are the components that you're adding up to get these numbers? And you can see that there's a lot of floundering in not really understanding what those pieces are.